In this episode, we're going to pick and then walk through how to gut an American Lock Series 1100 padlock. Hey folks, welcome to Pugs Picks Locks. If you're new here, feel free to click that subscribe button and then ring the notification bell so you'll always be notified when I release new content like this. And if you like the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Click that like button and then leave a question or comment down below if you have one. I'm more than happy to engage with you in the comment section, either to answer questions or to receive your feedback. I do not always get everything right. So did I get something wrong? Is there something I could do differently? Something I could do better? Please let me know. I'm always looking to learn from you and expand my own skill set, my own knowledge base, so that I can provide you better and better content on this channel. Okay, let's dive into this video. We are going to be picking this American Lock Series 1100 padlock. And once we have it open, we're going to go ahead and gut it. And I know there's a lot of pick and gut videos out there, especially pick and gut videos for the Series 1100 locks. What I hope to do a little bit differently is I'm going to really focus on giving detailed step-by-step instructions as I go through the gutting process. And the gutting process is going to be, you'll be able to apply it to any other rekeyable padlock with a similar type of build. But I'm going to focus very specifically on some of the tips and tricks and some of the intricacies and things to watch out for with the Series 1100 American locks. We've all had gutting disasters. I have had more than my share of gutting disasters. So this is the voice of painful experience coming to you. All right, let's go ahead and try to pick this thing open. For that, we are going to be using top of the keyway tension, sorry. And we're going to be using this Z-wrench, which is my favorite tension tool in all the world, as I've mentioned many times on this channel. So we're going to go ahead and remember that this is the top of the keyway, even though I invert the lock because I'm left-handed and I tension with my thumb. So we're going to be using kind of medium tension. And by medium tension, I mean it takes a little bit of work to slide my pick between my thumb, my tensioning finger, and the tension wrench. If I were doing light tension, it would slip through really easily. So we're going to be using a little bit more towards the medium tension side, and let's make sure that that's the core is completely reset. All right, I like to pick from the back of the lock forward, so I am going to put my pick all the way in the back of the lock, and then I pull the pick out until it catches on pin 5, and let's press 5, and got to click out of 5. Click out of 4, 2 clicks out of 4. Hopefully that was not an overset because I kind of slipped with the pick a little bit. Okay, it feels good. Pin 3 feels floppy. Pin 2 feels floppy. Pin 1 got a couple of clicks out of 1. Okay, so let's go back to the back of the lock. 5, 4, 3 is still floppy. 2. Got a click out of 2. 1 still feels set. Okay, back of the lock again. 5, 4, 3. Oh, okay, 3 is binding now. Click, and we have an open. Okay. That was interesting. Often with these American locks, you get a nice false set, and the false set tells you it's time to go play Hunt the Spool. We did not get that false set. Well, if we did, I didn't feel it. So, celebratory swivel. Okay, so let's go ahead and gut this thing. In order to get this base plate, which is holding the core in order to get this base plate out, and it looks like a rivet, that's a retaining nut, and there is a screw inside of the lock here. So, one of the things that's kind of important to remember is when you pick it open, reset the core, close it up, lock up the core. And I'll tell you why that's important in just a moment. I'll show you why as soon as we get the base plate off and everything, as soon as we get the core out. So to get the core out, we need to remove this retaining nut and then remove the base plate. In order to get the retaining nut out, there's a screw inside the hole for the shackle. And so we're going to go in and I like to cover the base plate and the retaining nut with my palm as I'm unscrewing it. And that prevents everything inside the lock from just spilling out as soon as the screw is loose. There is Loctite on the screw. And a tip that I actually learned from Lady Locks, if you haven't checked out her channel, please do. She's a wonderful lock picker that I've learned a lot from. Is if you can't turn it because of the Loctite, if you just put the screwdriver in and then you whack it, not way too hard, just a few times with a hammer or some other object, but if you whack it a few times, it'll loosen up the Loctite enough that you'll then be able to turn it. Okay, so we're going to remove the screw. Okay, there's our screw, our retaining screw. And then I'm going to, let's put that out of the way since we don't need it anymore at the moment. And then I turn it over, I cover the base plate with my thumb, and I drop out the retaining nut. Okay. And then I take the base plate out. And then I make sure the logo is up. And then I slide out the core. And the reason why I do that is because if you can see inside there, that little wafer, that little half circle wafer, that is an anti-bypass tool wafer. That is to protect the lock from just sticking a bypass tool into the keyway and working the mechanism. If you don't have the logo up or you're not careful and you just dump everything out, that retaining that anti-bypass wafer, that can slide out also, which isn't the end of the world. It's easy to put back in. It's just one thing that I don't have to worry about. So I just slide it out carefully like that, and there's our core. We can set the hull aside since we don't need it for the moment. Okay, so there's our hull. I'm going to move the picks out of the way. And there's our key. Okay, so when you take a look at this core here, some of the things to watch for is, you see how the face of the core of the plug, the face of the plug, the keyway, has this little notch in the Bible that it's recessed into. Keep that notch in mind. That little lip on the edge of the Bible tells you where the first pin stack is. Okay, and that becomes important later. The first thing we're going to have to do is here on the back, we're going to have to remove this Circlip. It's called a Circlip, a C-clip, a retaining clip, many names, same thing. I don't know if you can see it there, but so we're going to have to take that out. So we have our Circlip removal tool. There are many like it. This one came from that Huck gutting set that you can get on AliExpress or other websites. It takes like a month or more to get to arrive to be delivered from China. Sparrows, however, makes a great gutting wrench. They make a phenomenal gutting wrench. So what I just did is another one of the little tips and tricks here. I just turned, here, let me actually set things. Okay, take the clip out. So this is one of the tips for, because what you'll see a lot is, there we go, is people, when they're trying to remove the circlip, they will ping the circlip. It's under spring pressure and it'll go flying across the room. So what I like to do is I take the hook of the clip removal tool, and then I use it to turn the clip, or I use that ledge on the clip, and I use it to turn the clip until the end of the clip is sitting here in the bottom of the keyway. Let's see. Can you see how the end of the clip here is now sitting in the bottom of the keyway? So I then take that ledge on the removal tool, and I push it right up against there. So I'm jamming the end into the bottom of the keyway. And then I push the clip out. And having it in the bottom of the keyway like that traps that end, so you're only dealing with one end, and you can gently remove the circlip without it going flying across the room. Does that make sense? Okay. The reason why it was important to lock up the core before we started doing this is because the instant that retaining pin is removed, that retaining clip is removed, is if here, I'll show you. Take the key and because we're gonna have to unlock it anyways. But when it's unlocked, you can see that the plug can start coming out of the cylinder. So if I had left it in its picked state and not locked it back up, as soon as I popped that clip off, I could have dumped the plug, and all the pins and springs would have gone flying everywhere. Gutting disasters. Ask me how I know. Actually, don't ask me how I know. I'm a little embarrassed on how many times I've actually done that. Okay, so that's why it's important to lock up the core before you remove the retaining clip, before you remove the circlip. Okay, so now the next step is holding it so that the Bible is facing away from you. You are going to want to turn, you see how the back of the plug, it has a cam on one side. This is the cam that engages, and when you open it, that cam turns, right? And that engages the locking mechanism inside the hull that pops the shackle open. Okay, so with the Bible facing away from you, turn the key so that the key is now facing upwards. When you turn the key so that it is facing upwards, we're doing a couple things. We're lining the cam up with the Bible of the lock. Okay, can you see that? We are also, and I can do this, so you see that first key pin right there in the plug? We're arranging it so the key pins are facing upwards, so they will not dump out. If you had it, if you have this the other way with the Bible facing towards you and you start to push the plug out, key pins are going to come falling out. You also want to make sure that you never, I mean, it's recoverable, but it's still a mess, that you never turn the plug all the way over, because the key pins will then drop out of these holes in the bottom of the cylinder. All right. So just a few things to pay attention to. So now that we have the retaining clip removed, Bible facing away from us, we turn the key upwards. The cam is now on the Bible side of the cylinder. And now we are going to take our follower. Sorry, let me kind of wedged in here. Come on. There we go. All right. So we have our pinning tweezers. And then we have our follower. So, trying not to lose anything here. Bible facing away from us, key facing upwards. So the key pins are facing upwards. We then push out the plug using the follower. And you can see that as I'm doing this, that cam is going to prevent pins from dropping out because of, let's do it the wrong way for just a moment. If I start to push out before the follower can cover the hole, the pin, the chamber hole in the Bible and in the cylinder, before it can cover it, there is that gap there. And that gap there means there's room for the driver pin to come flying out. And then the spring will come out, and then everything will be a mess because you'll catch the spring and destroy the spring, etc. All right. So cam facing the Bible, follower in place. We start to slide the plug out, making sure the key pins are facing up towards us. And there we go. So now the follower is preventing the driver pins from popping out of the Bible and the springs from popping out. Okay, so then I remove that. With our key pins facing us, I find this easier to do without the key in the lock. So I put my thumb over the key pins and I gently pull the key out. The reason why I put my thumb over, I'm going to try to do this without. You see how the key pins are move with the key and they pop up. Some of them pop up. You can pop the key pins right out of the plug. If you don't, so that's why I just cover it with my thumb. I pull the key out, and then with my thumb still covering all of the key pin holes except for one. So there's the hole for key pin 1. I dump that out. And then I take my pinning tweezers and I put it in slot 1 on my pinning tray here. Second one, I dump it out. Sometimes you have to tap it a little bit to get it out. And then I put that in the right place. The reason why I am dumping it out over here is because this is a deeper cut than the actual spot for it on the pinning tray, and that prevents the pin from just like rolling off and flying, and then I have to get on my hands and knees, and I'm an old man and I don't like crawling around on the floor anymore, so that's why I'm dumping it there into the deeper groove. Okay. And then the last one. There we go. So there are 5 key pins. And now I can put the plug there. And you can see that those key pins, they are all serrated key pins. So that's fun, right? All right. Now to get the driver pins and the springs out of the core, you're going to be removing the follower, and and you're going to be removing them very carefully because you can mess things up. So the holes on the bottom of the cylinder kind of can help you line up the follower where you want to be. So this American locks are, unless it's a challenge lock or a lock that somebody's modified, the Series 1100 American locks are pinned for 5 pins. They have 5 pin stacks, as you can see here. There are 6 chambers. So I'm starting at the back of the lock, at the back of the plug, and I'm starting with pin 5. How do I know it's pin 5? Because this lip, this little lip here, remember how I said that little lip, that extra little ledge on the Bible, that is in line with, that's where chamber 1 is. It's very important. That is where chamber 1 is. Okay. So here we go, chamber 6. We know it's empty, so I can expose that one easily, right? So I get that right there. And then what I do, and you can see inside that chamber 1 is exposed. You can actually even see the pin in chamber 5. Now, if I just pull the plug out, it's under spring pressure, so it's going to go ping, it's going to pop up. If I'm lucky, it'll stay inside the cylinder. If I'm not lucky, it'll end up on the floor, and I'll have to crawl around like a fool. So what I do is I put my tweezers at the back of, take my pinning tweezers, and I put it at the back of the follower, and I use it to kind of push the follower forward until, I don't know if you heard the click, but the click was that pin popping up, and you can see that now it's sitting up into the cylinder. And so I go ahead and I grab it with my pinning tweezers. And I try very hard to keep things oriented the same way. And just so you know, while I'm putzing around with the tweezers, I pull the cylinder back all the way onto the follower, just so that I don't make a mistake and have it come sliding off the end. And so I try to be very careful about when you grab the pin. This is the side. Sorry, this is the side that was touching the spring. So I try to make sure that I orient it in the tray so that it's facing up towards the little slot here for the spring. Just so that I keep things oriented the way they were originally. I don't know, it may or may not make the biggest difference in the world, but it's what I do. Okay, now to get that spring out of the chamber, I am exposing chamber 5, and then I just dump the spring out into my hand. I slide the follower through the cylinder again so I don't mess up, and then I can put the spring there in its appropriate spot. Okay. Then I go after pin 4, and it's the same thing. I expose 5. You can see pin 4 just underneath the follower. And then I push that forward with the tweezers. And then until that pin has popped up into the chamber, into the cylinder. And then I grab it with the tweezers, pull it out gently. This is the side that was facing the spring. So I orient it in the tray so that side is facing the spring. I expose chamber 4 again, turn, dump the spring out into my hand, put the follower all the way through the cylinder again, and 4. And then I turn the lock around and I go after pin 1. And the reason why I do that is you can see that if I keep going this direction, I'm going to be having to reach further and further into the cylinder. So we did 5 and we did 4. And then to get to 3, I got to reach deeper in, and then to 2, and then to 1. Right? Okay. So I turn it around so that I can start from the other end. And there's that lip that tells me I'm facing pin 1, right? So I push it forward and click. Okay. It pops up. I grab it with the pinning tweezers, push the follower back through, and then since that was touching the spring, I orient it that way in the tray. All right. And now we just do the same thing with 2 and 3. And so I'm going to go a little quicker and not narrate so that this video can maybe not be a gazillion years long. All right. And I didn't dump the springs each time because sometimes it's faster to get all the pins and then you dump the springs afterwards. If you want to dump all the springs all at once, that's fine also. I know plenty of folks do it that way. I like to, maybe it's because I'm just a little bit overly detail focused, and I like to preserve everything the best that I can. So the springs are in the actual chambers that they're aligned with the pin stack that they were with inside the plug, inside the cylinder, inside the core. All right, so we have our springs up in the spring slots, and then we have our key pins and our driver pins. So if we walk through this, we have serrated driver pin. Let's try to get that in the light a little bit better. Anyways, serrated driver pin. Serrated driver pin, serrated driver pin, serrated driver pin, and then spool pin. So our spool pin was in 1, which actually kind of might explain why I never got to that false set. Because I set 1, I set 2, then I set 1. I went 5, 4, 2, 1, and then 3. So that explains why we never got our false set. All right. So, and that is the gutting process. Now, the repinning or reassembly process, you basically walk the other direction through the steps. So I will take I'll take my and there's the empty cylinder. You can see all the chamber, all the holes for the pin stacks in the Bible, each of the chambers for it. All right, so I will take my follower and I will put it through the cylinder again, and I'm going to start with pin 3. So I'm exposing chamber 3. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop in the springs for 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to do that quickly. Do that up front. So I grab with spring 3. I drop it into chamber 3, spring 2. Drop that into chamber 2. And spring 1. And drop that into chamber 1. Okay. So now we have our springs in place, and so now I can focus on the driver pins. Remember how I was careful with the way that I took the driver pins out so that they would be oriented properly. So this is the side. This here is the side that's facing the springs. So when I pick this up, I will pick it up by the other end, so that you can see now that I have half of it exposed. And I take that half and I put it into, make sure chamber 3 is exposed, chamber 3, and then I will drop it. And you can see that it's sitting up. It's sitting up because it's resting on the spring. So what I then do is I push down on that pin and I push the follower forward until the follower is covering that pin. Okay. And then I do the same thing with pin 2. I grab it by the key driver side so that the spring side of it is sticking out. And I drop that into chamber 2, push down on the pin with my tweezers. I don't know if you can see that. And then I push the follower forward until that pin is covered up and trapped by the follower. I just went backwards. I put pin 1 in the 3 slot. So I'm going to take 2 out. See, even when you do this 100 times, you still can get things out of order. I put 1 in 3. So I'm going to grab pin 3, and I'm going to drop that into chamber 3. All right. The wonders of live video. I'd have to reshoot everything in order to fix that. And plus, you guys wouldn't get the authentic experience of watching me mess things up. All right. So there's pin 2 now. I'm going to blame it on having to narrate my actions. It distracted me from focusing on details. So I'm blaming all of y'all. All right, now I have 3, 2, and 1 pinned up properly this time. I turn it around and I expose chamber 4. I'm actually exposing chambers 4, 5, and 6. I'm going to drop the spring for 4 into chamber 4. Sometimes, part of the reason why I like keeping the springs in the order that they were originally in is that sometimes you'll have locks that have a particularly weak spring or a particularly strong spring in one of the chambers. And that's done on purpose sometimes, and sometimes it's just a manufacturing quirk. But it's done sometimes on purpose as a security measure, because weak springs overset easily. You put the pressure you're expecting on the pin as you're trying to pick it, and that weak spring allows that pin to drop straight into the Bible with almost no resistance. And then with a stronger spring, you're cranking on the pin with what you think is the usual amount of pressure to set it with the pick, and it's not moving as freely, and so you're wondering, is it binding? Is it overset? Is it... because it's not giving you the same feedback. So that's kind of why I like keeping the springs in the order that they're originally in. But that's a personal quirk. Okay, so I have chambers 4 and 5. I have the springs in place. So now I go ahead and I do the same thing in terms of dropping pin 4 in. If I can line up with the freaking chamber. And then pin 5. And I did not grab that. Okay. And like I said, I grab it from the key pin side so that it'll fit into the chamber before I let go of it to keep it in place. Now we can see it inside. Push it down with the tweezers. Push the follower through. So now I have the all 5 chambers reloaded with the springs and the driver pins. Okay, so now it's time to reload the plug with the key pins. So for this, I grab the key again, and I put the key in the plug. And the reason why I put the key in the plug is it helps me verify that I'm putting the key pins in the correct chambers. All right. And I grab pin 1 so that the key side of the pin is exposed and facing down. Insert that into chamber 1 and let it drop. So with the key in place, you can see that it sits absolutely flush. It sits flush with the cylinder. If the key weren't in place, it drops down inside the chamber, right? And so you can't tell if it's... This is one of the ways to check to make sure you're putting the right pin, the correct pin, in the correct chamber. So I'm gonna dump that out. That's 1. If I had instead loaded one with if I'd loaded chamber 1 with say I'd grabbed pin 2 here by mistake, you can see that it is no longer sitting flush with the cylinder. So you know that that is the incorrect. You can be like, oh, I just put the wrong pin in the wrong chamber. Or if I'd grabbed 3 by mistake and dropped that in, I have the key in place and that's actually sitting not flush. It's sitting below. Can you see that? It's sitting below the lip of the chamber. So I would know then that that's the wrong one. If it's sitting flush, you know that is the correct cut. It is the correct depth pin. All right, so I'm going to go through and load up the chambers real quick with the key pins. Okay, all the key pins are sitting flush. And so that tells me I have all the key pins, the correct length key pins in the correct chambers, because they're all flush. Now, the one of the things I should have mentioned earlier, I can't tell you how much hassle getting proper pinning tweezers has saved me. Because my other tweezers, and I have a couple other pairs, are not formed at the end like this. Being able to just pick up a that formed end, being able to grip perfectly like that has saved me so much time crawling around on the carpet trying to find pins that went flying, because you're squeezing the tweezers and ping, it goes flying. Getting properly formed, proper pinning tweezers, I cannot stress this enough. It will save you such a headache. It'll save you many hours crawling around trying to find these minuscule little pins that are lost in the carpet. All right. Okay, once we have our plug loaded with all the key pins, and our cylinder, remember, was loaded. We just loaded the cylinder. We loaded the Bible with the springs and the key pin and the driver pins. We're gonna check and double check that where that first chamber is. This lip is chamber 1. That is where the first pin is. If you are working with a lock that does not have an extra lip like that, I literally take a Sharpie and I mark where 1 is so that I get things lined up properly. If you don't do this, it leads to it leads to problems. You will have issues. I promise you. Okay, I turn it so the Bible is facing away from me again, and that 1 is lined up with the side that I'm going to be inserting the plug in. And I insert the plug, and then I just push the follower through with the plug, and then I turn the key or turn the Bible so that it's locked up. When you take the key out now, the core is locked. The plug won't rotate. Be careful as you do this, because if you go the other direction and you turn the key so that the top of the keyway that ends up in line with the holes in the bottom of the chamber, you're going to dump all your key pins again. And then you'll have to get a shim and get the driver pins out and get the plug out. And it becomes a hassle. So key is oriented with the key pins upwards. And now we remove the key. The plug is locked up again. The core will not rotate. The plug will not rotate. We dig the little Circlip out, little C-clip out, and we put that back on. And it's just little, you line it up with the grooves. You can see the grooves in the back of the plug. So we line it up so that the tips are in those grooves. You can see that, and then we just, slipped. And then we just give it a little push with our thumb, and the Circlip is now back in place. It's locked up again. And now, if we turn it and unlock it, the plug won't come dropping out of the cylinder. Okay. All right. So we have our core reassembled, and then we just slide that back logo up, slide that back in, and you can see how the semicircle in the bypass protection wafer, the anti-bypass wafer, you can see how that cutout in the wafer matches the cutout, the cam at the back of the plug. So you put that back in, just slide it back in, and it'll sit nice at the depth it's supposed to sit at. That lets you put the base plate in. If you do it the other way, if it's upside down or whatever, and you slide that in, it will not, the core will not sit deep enough, and you won't be able to get the base plate to cover it. So just make sure that you have things oriented correctly so that you can put it in. If that anti-bypass wafer has turned or whatever, usually what will happen is you didn't reset the lock, and so that anti-bypass wafer will be turned slightly. So when you put it in, it won't sit flush even if you put it in the right way. You can just insert your key and just wiggle it back and forth and it'll eventually catch the wafer and move it back to the right place. So then when you do that, it'll catch it, put it back in the right place. And once it's back in the right place, you can then carefully pull your key out. And you'll be good to go. Except for I have that vigorous movement knocked the wafer free. So if the wafer comes out like it is here, it is out of the lock, right? Out of the hole. If that wafer comes out, all you have to do is just put it on top of the plug and careful that you don't knock it, right? Because here you can knock it off, right? So just be careful you don't knock it off. Just drop the entire thing back in and you're good to go. And so there it is back in the correct place. All right. And then you just put your base plate back on and you leave the shackle open. Closing the shackle is the very last thing you're going to do. Leave the shackle open. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. Drop your retaining nut back in, and then I cover it with my palm. Turn it over. I drop the screw back in, and I tighten that screw down. And I'm not trying to crank it hard, right? I just get to where it stops and maybe just a little bit more. Just snug it up nice. You don't want to over tighten it. Okay, now before you close your shackle, with the shackle still open, do a function test. Okay, the reason why we do that is because you will sometimes have a core that is seized up. It is seized up and won't turn. And I can't do anything about, well, I can do stuff about it, but I can't do anything easy to repair that right now because the key is seized. The plug is seized up. What's happening is the plug is being pressed against the base plate too hard, and so I can't turn the key. Remember that lip in the Bible that lets the face of the plug, the face of that lets keyway sit flush with that lip on the edge of the cylinder, on the edge of the Bible. Just that little bit of difference is now that protects it from being pressed against the key plate, against the base plate like this, and seizing your core. All right. So now in order to get this one out, the easiest way, or the way that there's a couple of ways to do it, but I'm going to have to, for this particular lock, I'm going to have to drill out or grind off the retaining nut is one approach. Another approach is to get a bypass tool down in there, somehow break a hole in the anti-bypass wafer and then use the bypass tool to open it. Anyways, different discussion for different time. Okay, so we do our function test here. And then we can close it up and do another function test. And hey, we've gutted and reassembled this American lock Series 1100 padlock. And that's how you do it. And the same process, the same steps, removing the core, removing any retaining pin, carefully removing the plug with the follower so that you don't lose any pins, dumping out the key pins one at a time, then going after and then moving the follower very carefully so that you can remove the driver pins and the springs one at a time. That same process holds true for so many locks that are rekeyable, so many padlocks that are rekeyable like this one is. The process is very similar. The steps are very similar, almost the same across many different locks. The there are just those few considerations to keep in mind when you are gutting an American lock, like making sure the cam is lined up with the Bible and things like that, making sure that the lip of the Bible is the side that the face of the plug is resting in, so that it can be flush with the edge of the Bible. Things like that. Those are the considerations that are kind of unique to this particular lock. All right. If you have questions, leave them down below. I didn't go into the use of shims because I can gut this lock without shims. Maybe in a future video, I'll do another pick and gut of 1100, and I'll show how you might use shims to prevent the pins from flying everywhere. Anyhow, there you have it. Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, remember to drop a like and leave a comment or a question below. If you're new here, subscribe and ring the notification bell for more content like this. Until the next video, happy picking y'all.